Welcome to another episode of Retrospective Gaming. In this episode, I am reviewing Dark Sun: Shattered Lands. This game was released in 1992, and it's an official Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition game. No long intro, we're just going to get straight to the review. Here is my review of Dark Sun: Shattered Lands. After you create your party, the story starts off with your party as prisoners, and not just prisoners, gladiators too. What a rough, unforgiving life, fighting others to the death, and if you survive, you just get to live another day of misery. Your life is only as long as how many wins you can get in the arena. The world that surrounds you is just as brutal as your life. Athos is a hellish desert. This is a place where lives are worth less than a dagger, and evil won. No, evil's not trying to take over, they're not struggling. This isn't a bout between good and evil. No, evil took over. And when you think about the circumstances of your existence in this game, it's as close to hopeless as you can get. All you have to do is look at this game for a couple of seconds to realize how depressing it is, but things are about to change for your party. You escape the arena and come to a realization. You have to unite the cities to fight against the city-state of Draj. This area is ruled by an evil sorcerer king who doesn't value any life and just wants power. And your ragtag group of former gladiators are the only ones willing to do what's necessary to end him. This isn't an easy task. The inhabitants of Athos are scarred and hardened by their lives in this land. They don't easily trust, and you don't really know who has your back in this area. This is how Dark Sun: Shattered Lands starts off. Right from the start, you'll notice how different the Dark Sun setting is from other D&D games. Psionic powers are present, and every one of your party members is at least familiar with it. When you create a party, you'll see races that you're used to seeing in other role-playing games like humans and elves, but you'll also see some things that you're not used to, like the Thrykean. These things are humanoid insects, and not only that, you can make a mole party member. Moles are a cross between humans and dwarves, and they are pretty fucking muscular. Before I continue gushing about the setting, I have to talk about the story. I enjoyed my journey through this game. The main story isn't really anything complex or fantastic, but it was interesting enough to motivate me to beat the game. But what I remember the most about Dark Sun: Shattered Lands is the setting and the inhabitants. I remember them very well, and that's this game's biggest strength, the setting. There's nothing quite like it. I've never seen anything like this setting before. And all I did as soon as I got out and really could explore the world, I just ran around fighting and just talking to these different species and just trying to figure out who they are, what's their purpose through this hellish desert, and how the fuck are they surviving. I remember just walking around and I went into this area and I saw something that I called the Whirlwind Lizard. This dude was being followed by something called a Dust Devil. I immediately went up and talked to him and heard his story about him losing his tribe and his desires to become a chief. I found a hidden temple and talked to a ghost that really creeped me out. This entity did not know her whereabouts and just kept spouting that she wanted to go home. I ran into a visionary, all painted up, looking very tribal, and this bitch kept shouting at me about drums and my fate. This is the biggest strength of Dark Sun: Shattered Lands. It's its setting. It's really something different, and you just have to explore it to understand it or read about it. I was reading YouTube comments and someone described this setting as Mad Max with psionic powers, and I could see why. You're in a harsh desert and are constantly in danger. It just seems like everyone is out to get each other. You don't really see standard good and evil because everyone is just trying to survive, and when desperation and scarce resources are a reality, things will go to hell. It's kill or be killed. The main story isn't anything special, and the end fight is a bit underwhelming, which you can sort of understand because there is a sequel to this game, so they have to find a way to set it up so you can continue playing in the sequel. I do wish there were more side quests. There are secrets and other things to discover outside the main story, but it's a bit linear, which isn't a terrible thing because the inhabitants and the unique world of Athos makes up for it. The main story is just the icing on the cake. The real treat of playing this game is exploring the world. I was interested in the city-states and how their relationships with each other and what they had to do to get on your side. I just felt that the climax wasn't as good as the lead-up. This game is a little different from the other gold box games that came out before it. Instead of going into first person when you explore this game in an isometric top-down view. The game uses the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2.0 rules. I'm not really familiar with D&D rule sets. I read some of it, but I'm not an expert, that's for sure. This game is accessible to players who don't know much about D&D rule sets. There are going to be some trial and error, and you might scratch your head at certain things, but you can definitely get by without knowing the D&D rule sets in and out. I like the fact that there are size spells, but I rarely used them. I just didn't need it. I am impressed by the amount of spells in Dark Sun. You get a bunch of protection spells, you can summon tentacles. Yeah, I know what you're probably thinking. Get your mind out the gutter, you damn weebs. You also get spells where you can turn pebbles into boulders, psionic blasts and crush spells, and on top of that you also have metabolic and telepathic spells too. And that's one thing that I've always liked about D&D games and the universe. There's just so much to work with, and even though there's a bunch of rules, you just have so much to use and so much to pick. But I just stuck to certain spells. I barely touched what the game had to offer, but I just didn't need to use it. And most likely a lot of the spells are somewhat useless, but it's nice to have variety. And speaking of variety and how different this game is, let me tell you about some of the things I fought in this game. I got into a fight with things that look like beetles. Nothing special, right? But wait, these fuckers can shoot psionic powers at you. I went into an area surrounded by lava and got attacked by insect humanoids. They look like mantises. I fought giants and walked into a lair filled with shadows and the remains of people who were tortured on display for me to see. Yeah, and there's more to see. If you want an even deeper look at the Dark Sun setting, read about it. There's some crazy creatures in that game. Including, I read somewhere where someone said there was time traveling or dimension traveling worms. What the fuck? God damn, I love this Dark Sun setting. I have to go read about it. If you're familiar with turn-based CRPGs or the gold box games, you will have no problems figuring out the basics. Combat is turn-based, and everything happens on screen. There's no transitioning into battles. You don't have to see a flash and then you move to another screen. Everything happens right there. You see your enemies, and when you run into them, your party spreads out and the battle begins. This is one of the easier D&D games, at least to me. There are elements of anxiety and survival because your characters can die. One of two things happens when one of your party members loses a fight. They either get knocked out or they die. And if you don't have anything to resurrect them, or if you're in the beginning where you have no access to it, you have to start another character and replace them. So you have to watch out for that. There is a bit of strategy and hoping that your character doesn't die, or you can just reload saves. I really didn't have to use a lot of strategy and plan out my battles with a lot of fights. That doesn't mean that there are no hard moments in this game or it's just a walk in the park. It's not. But it's really nothing intricate where I have to plan out every move and just do this and that. Especially with the gladiator, because once he reached a certain level, he can mow down a lot of the general enemies. Especially when he can mow down a lot of them in one turn. That's very useful. There are some things that you might not notice if you don't really pay attention. Psionic powers have checks, so your character can fail that check and not even cast the spell. And certain classes do help out in certain things. For example, a thief is better at climbing up walls than a fighter, so keep that in mind. I do have some issues with gameplay. There is no real way to spread out your party and plan it out so that your weaker characters are in the back and they're not at risk at getting hit just like the other ones. When you see an enemy on screen, whether you're traveling with your party leader or you have a collapsed party, the fight just begins and the characters appear right there. The problem is, if your characters don't have the first turn, if they don't go first, then your weaker characters are right there and they can get hit. If the enemy is smart, they'll try to go after the weaker ones. There's no options or anything like that to move the party members that are weak to the back so that they can just focus on support and healing. It's not really a huge issue. I understand that this is a game that came out in 1992 and it really wasn't a major issue that made me turn off the game or anything like that, but still, it would have been nice to have this option. Next issue is the bugs. This game is buggy. I didn't run into any game-breaking bugs or anything that made me quit, but you do see them. There are graphical issues that pop up every now and then. And for example, in one of my fights, my gladiator just stopped having turns. He wasn't under any spell, he wasn't entangled or anything like that. He just stopped fighting. He couldn't use any more turns. And I kept on guarding on my other characters just to see if the turns would go back to my gladiator, but he just stopped fighting and I had to reload. Dark Sun not only has a fantastic setting, it has great music. Some of the songs are pretty upbeat, and it kind of doesn't match the world because the world's not upbeat at all, but some of the music is. But it's really good, especially the main menu theme. It's really fucking groovy. But there is an issue. The default DOSBox settings, at least for me, it has like an inferior sound drive or whatever, and the sound is just not that good. So if you want the full experience of listening to the soundtrack, I'll leave a link in the description so where you can listen to it on YouTube. And there's ways that you can download drivers and put them in DOSBox so you can have a good sound system in there, or driver, or whatever the hell you call it, and you can really listen to the OST. It's worth it. Overall, I recommend Dark Sun Shattered Lands. I don't know about the sequel, I haven't played it yet, but the first installment in this series is definitely worth checking out, just for the setting alone. It's really interesting. There's some really crazy stuff in there and things that I personally have not seen before. Thank you for watching. If you want to leave a comment, go ahead. You know how to get into contact with me. Have a great day.